السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Bismillah. My name is Mahmoud, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share how I entered into Islam um, and how Allah guided me to um, to His Deen, to the path of Islam, inshallah ta'ala. I watched a couple of the previous stories that were shared, and I'm just so amazed, um, by Allah's power and Allah's grace in guiding people to His religion. And you know, it would definitely it's true for me, and I think it's true for everyone who takes a journey and really enters into Islam fully. Because I think, it doesn't matter if you were born a non-Muslim, if you were born a Muslim, if you're born into a Muslim family, all of us have to take that journey to, believe, to real sincere practice and sincere belief in Allah and His Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, it's amazing, but it's especially amazing hearing reverts stories, people who, weren't born into a Muslim family that, were guided, subhanAllah, to become a Muslim. And, it's a great blessing from Allah. The great, it's a sign that Allah loves a person, that He brings him into Islam. And so I think one thing about my story is that, it's nothing, absolutely nothing from my own effort, right? It's just Allah, being perfect as He is, planning and, planning and unfolding my life in the most perfect way, more perfect than I or anyone else could ever imagine. And that's something that I've always sensed in my life, even before I was a Muslim, that things were unfolding in my life perfectly. That there was, some sort of divine schedule going on, but I didn't really have, a real way of thinking about it till I became Muslim. But anyway, so with that being said, I'll tell you, the basic, events of how I became Muslim, inshallah ta'ala. So a little bit about my background. I grew up Quaker. Most of you have heard of Quaker from the oatmeal, probably. You think Quaker oats, right? Yeah, so I grew up Quaker in like Northeast in Maine, like in Northeast region, New England, Northeast of the United States. And our meetings, my experience as like a Christian growing up in the United States was probably different from what most people would think. We did meet, we had services on Sunday mornings, but there wasn't a preacher or anything. We would meet at people's homes. Sometimes Quakers have like a space for worship, but sometimes they just meet at people's homes. And we would sit together for an hour in silence. And that was the meeting, essentially. We would sit together in silence for an hour, and then we would, have some tea and coffee, and then we would leave. Now, there's more to it. There's more to the hour of silence that I don't have time to go into. But it was a fairly contemplative, more kind of, spiritual, open kind of setting, and that's, kind of the setting that I grew up in. When I was 15, I took a world religions class, actually taught to me by my mother. SubhanAllah, she's a college professor, alhamdulillah, mashallah, and she, I was trying to get, credits for my high school, so she's like, okay, I'll teach you a world religions course. And through that world religions course, I got introduced to Buddhism. That spoke to me at first. I did, see Islam, but At the time, it was just a chapter in the book at the time. But at that time, Buddhism spoke to me. And I started, really investigating Buddhism when I was 16. I lived at a Zen Buddhist monastery for like a short period of time, like a week, um, and just to try it out, just to see what it was like. And we were waking up at 3:30 in the morning. We would meditate for like 3 hours. You know, I was the only person who wasn't a monk there. I would be, so I was just eating breakfast with a bunch of Zen Buddhist monks when I was 16. I felt fairly out of place, but that was kind of really the beginning stages of me seeking, looking for Allah. I was still pretty far from it, but I was really actively searching. So throughout my late teens, I was continued to be more and more interested in it. And when I was 20 years old, I actually traveled to Nepal in order to study Tibetan Buddhism there. So anyway, so around that time, I think when I got back from Nepal, that's when things started kind of getting into motion. For me to become a Muslim. And I was living in New Jersey at the time, North Jersey, and I walked out. This is the first kind of event, really, and this is of exposure to Islam, and it's the most miraculous, I think, out of all of the different events that I'll share with you. So I was living in New Jersey. I'm in college. I'm like a sophomore or a junior in college, something like that. And I walk out of my apartment, and I'm going to the convenience store to get something from there, just a bottle of water, some juice or something. And there's a woman at the bus stop right next to the convenience store, and she's wearing a jacket which has like a Buddhist logo on it. And I say to her, and I see it, so I bow to her on the street, as is the etiquette in some Buddhist communities, they kind of bow to each other. And she bowed back to me, but she had kind of a quizzical look. She was kind of, like, who is this guy? Something like that. And so I went into the convenience store. Then I came back out. She was still waiting for the bus, and she says to me, she goes, "Why did you bow to me earlier?" And I said, "Oh, well, I saw the logo on your jacket. I thought I would bow to you because I saw the logo." And she says, "Oh, well, I thought that was very nice." And she reaches into her pocket and she gives me a flash drive. She gives me a USB, and she says 4 words that I'll never forget. And I think these 4 words were from Allah Azza, kind of like speaking to me, speaking directly to me, kind of through this person. She just goes, "This is for you," and she hands me the flash drive. So then I go back to my apartment. I put the flash drive into my computer, and I see that it's the Holy Quran. Subhanallah, and it's the PDF, Arabic and English, and also the MP3 of the recitation of the Quran. So suddenly I have all of this, Now I didn't know intellectually. I didn't know what any of this was. I had no exposure to the Arabic language. I didn't know that's what it looked like. I had maybe heard of the word. I had heard the word Quran before, but I didn't really know what it referred to. I didn't understand that this was like the holy book for a certain religion. You can't overestimate how ignorant I was at this time of any of this. In college, I was really in my own head. I just really didn't know much about the world at all. And so, but for my heart knew, at that time. And so, like, because I would go to bed listening to the Quran every night for like a year or so after that. I just thought it was beautiful. It was unique. I had never heard anything like that before. It was calming. I felt relaxed when I listened to it. It was something indescribable. And looking back on it, there's something kind of beautiful that it was speaking to me directly without I didn't know what it was. It was just some foreign out, like different thing for me that was relaxing, and I would listen to it when I went to bed. Anyway, so that was like the first kind of event. The second event also happened around the same time. I was in college. Now, I said I lived in North Jersey, but every weekend I would visit my best friend at the time who lived in New York City. He lives currently, he still lives in the same place, in the East Village. If you guys know, anyone watching this from New York City, like the East Village, he lived right by Tompkins Square Park. And usually we would hang out at his place, and we would go and hang out at the park. Um, and and he grew up in that area, and so and he was like very, mashallah, he's a really good person, and like we would, he knew like just everyone at the park. He loved the park. He loved playing ping pong. I always played ping pong there, and he knew like there are a lot of homeless people at the park, and he was friends with all of them, and he would sit down and talk with them, like and hang out with them, like without any pretense, like without any sense of like, oh, I'm helping this person in this way. He was just friends. He knew their names. He would talk to them like every day. And so when I went out and to hang out with my friend, inevitably I would hang out with like these homeless people at the park too, and they were like really really cool people for the most part. Anyway, in that period, I met a homeless guy named well, affectionately he was called Batman. He's been homeless in New York City for close to 30 years. I think like 28 or 29 years when I met him. And I started talking to him, and he told me that he also had another name called Hamza, and I learned that he was a Muslim. And he was telling me that was the first time I learned about any of the Sahaba. Like he told me about Hamza, and he said he was the uncle of the Prophet of Islam, that he was the protector. And we were just kind of talking in the park about this. And before long, maybe like just my first or second conversation with him, we walked together, and he led me to this mosque that's like in like the lower west side of Manhattan, like this little place. Like it's like you wouldn't even know it's a mosque really. You just kind of walk in this very unassuming place, kind of a small door, but you walk in and it's beautiful. It's from this like Turkish like Sufi tradition, and so he led me there, and it's really beautiful. Like they're doing the prayers, but they're also doing like group dhikr, like salawat like ala nabi, like prayers upon the Prophet and all of these things. So I said them. Of course, I didn't know that's what any of that was called, but it was beautiful to see that environment of like group dhikr. They had like the khor, they had some incense going on. The calligraphy on the walls was like gorgeous. And that was my first experience of like a place of worship being aesthetically beautiful. Like it was just beautiful to the eyes, beautiful to the ears, beautiful like smells and fragrances. It was something I had like never experienced before, and it was so comfortable, and it was so calming, and it was so inviting, and it was so embellished. There were so many beautiful things upon beautiful things in that mosque. Now I know when people nowadays, when you say Sufi, you get like cardiac arrest, right? So I don't want to like engage. I don't want to start any like, thing about any arguing, because people nowadays we love to fight. It's a huge fitna, I think, but. This is still a long time before. This is still 5 or 6 years before I actually became a Muslim. So, this is just kind of part of the path, right? But this guy Hamza from the park really gave me my first experience of Islam and like ibadah. That was just truly beautiful and sincere. I felt like at the time. So anyways, that was kind of the second thing that happened. Fast forward a few years, go to the third kind of event out of four. Um, I 3 years later, 4 years later, I traveled to Bahrain in the Gulf and I start learning Arabic. Again, I'm still not a Muslim, but Allah is just kind of guiding me in these ways, right? I got a job teaching English in Bahrain, and I start learning Arabic there, and I learned learning how to read and write, kind of like all the different skills. I just thought the Arabic language was really beautiful, probably from my experiences like at this mosque in New York City, hearing the kind of dhikr like being done in Arabic and things like that. Um, I think that experience really was the foundation for a lot of my seeking later on, even if I didn't realize it at the time. So I went to Bahrain, started learning Arabic, and it's amazing. I was like writing some of these reflections, these thoughts that I had at the time, um, and I'm writing from the perspective of not being Muslim yet. And it's amazing reading it now as a Muslim, where I'm writing like, oh, these mosques are so beautiful. I love the sound of the call to prayer. I love seeing the people, in response to the call to prayer, like leave their houses throughout the neighborhood and like walk to the mosque together. It was a different way of life than I had seen before. But there was something just very orderly about it, something very strong, and firm about that way of life that attracted me to it. And so when I read back on those reflections, I think about this theme of the 8 or 9 years before I became Muslim, that Allah was like constantly surrounding me with goodness and with richness and with Islam, but my heart was just close to it. But especially in Bahrain, I was learning Arabic. I was listening to the call to prayer. Like I was just totally surrounded, but again, my heart was still close to it. So then I think Allah needed to like step up, you know, like, I'm not seeing it, right? So I need to like, go somewhere like a little bit stronger, um, have a kind of a stronger experience at least. So I end up going to Jerusalem, and subhanallah, I was living in Ramallah, and I was working full time in Ramallah, and I was working part time in Jerusalem for about a year and a half. And during that time, I was starting to actually make more like Muslim friends. I felt more like integrated within the culture, more immersed in the culture, I guess. And yeah, so that was my first time having friends like who prayed, who like fasted, who did different things. And I remember at the time I was always a little envious. Like I felt like they had some source of like, strength, some source of like spirituality that I didn't have access to. And that was a sign, I think, because I think some people who aren't guided to Islam, they just go, oh, great, you're going to go pray. Great, I'll see you in 10 minutes or whatever. But my friends would go pray, and I would like really be wondering what that was like. I would be like, man, what am I doing? I'm just like sitting on my phone while they're doing this like, like this like religious obligation. It just seemed, it seemed like they had something that I didn't, like I was missing something. So one response to that for me was my first Ramadan in Ramallah, I started fasting. Because I felt like there were so many sources of blessings and so many sources of like strength and like kind of testing yourself and like purifying yourself through Islam, and I wanted to get a little bit of that at least. And so I was fasting during Ramadan, and one of my friends says to me like, "Hey, for your birthday, why don't we go down to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and we can break our fast there?" Like, pretty cool friend, right? Alhamdulillah, I had some good friends in my life. Um, and I said, yeah, sure, that would be great. So go down to um, like around Oscar time probably. I didn't know what the prayers were at that time, but around Oscar I probably went down to Jerusalem. We got to Al Aqsa maybe about an hour before Maghrib, and um, and so there's a little bit of time to spare. So I went into Al Aqsa, and I was just kind of walking around. Um, Again, I didn't know any of the etiquette of like a mosque or anything, but I just walked in, and I could read and write in Arabic, so I grabbed the Quran, and then I sat down and read some of it. I wasn't very good at Arabic, but I could at least make out some words and things like that. So I'm thinking like subhanallah, like I think back on it now, you know, subhanallah, like I'm sitting in Al Aqsa, I'm fasting, I'm reading the Quran in Arabic, I'm waiting to like break my fast outside of this place, and thinking back to that idea, that theme of like, how much more can Allah like envelop me, surround me with Islam without me accepting it, right? Um, and so I left the mosque, and then I went and broke my fast, kind of in this courtyard outside of the Dome of the Rock. For those of you who don't know, the Al Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock it's kind of one place. It's like one kind of courtyard. Um, there's a proper term for that space. I just can't remember what it is at that moment. But it's basically, two buildings, in the same space, right? So there's a courtyard in between them where everyone was sitting and breaking their fast. So I was sitting there, it was like broke my fast, and it was just beautiful what I was seeing, people making dua, people, doing like tasbih, like dhikr, people sharing food with each other. It was just, it was just unimaginably like sincere and beautiful and like comforting and soothing and all of these just you know amazing things. And I remember looking. I had kind of a moment where I kind of looked up at the stars. I kind of looked over at the Dome of the Rock. I kind of looked around at the people, you know, engaged in every type of ibadah like imaginable. And I'm thinking, like this is it. In this, incredibly short existence, in this incredibly, transitory, like fleeting, um, thing we're engaged in of dunya. Of course, I didn't have that word at the time. That kind of idea, like I found something really profound and really heavy, and I've I've found like a compassionate, merciful reality for my heart to enter into, you know, um, and after that there was that's when I accepted into my heart, and I took the Shahada not very long after that. Um, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. So I think from my story and from every other story, it's just like from no power of my own, Allah just kind of puts these people into my life, at the right time, who could have, you know, how did I meet the guy in the park that led me to the mosque? It's because I had my friend who lived in the area. Well, how did I meet that friend? It's because I went to high school in this certain place. Like how did I go to high school in that certain place? I was born in this way. All of these like just so many factors in our lives that if we kind of look back on it, it's just amazing how they're connected, and how they're related. But you can't ever, you know, control any of those things in a sense. It's just like Allah just has such a miraculous plan, you know, and plans so perfectly. That's just, that's like Allah's trademark for me is perfection. you know. So anyway, I hope anyone listening to this, and if you've made it this far, I've been talking for a long time, that you've benefited in some way, inshallah. And I hope that, um, all of us can continue to, focus on, what Allah has given us. Um, Allah says in the Quran, like, you are grateful, like we will increase you, right? Um, so the more that you're grateful for, the more that, um, the more that Allah will give you in dunya, and in the akhirah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah.